Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The ship did not scream when it broke. It groaned, low and deep, like something ancient rolling over in its sleep. Then the floor split open. Ravi Dhawan had been counting crates in Cargo Bay 7 when the first impact hit. Not an explosion, not a collision with another vessel. Just a quiet, devastating punch through the belly of the GSV Quiet Passage, delivered by a cluster of microasteroids that the sensors had never seen coming. He was thrown sideways. The lights died. Emergency strips along the floor flickered red, then amber, then nothing. In the blackness, he heard the terrible sound of metal folding, and then a support beam came down across his left leg like a hammer. He did not scream either. He gasped. His teeth clamped shut. His hands gripped the cold floor, and he held himself still while the pain roared through him like fire in a pipe. Somewhere above, the ship's AI spoke. Its name was Lantern, and its voice was calm the way a clock is calm, steady, mechanical, and completely indifferent to suffering. Fatal damage confirmed to decks 4 through 6. Hull integrity at 14%. Crew survival probability 11%. All personnel are advised to evacuate to upper decks immediately. Ravi lay in the dark, pinned under the beam, bleeding from his side where shrapnel had torn through his jumpsuit. He could feel the air thinning already. The breach was somewhere close. The cargo bay was losing atmosphere. 3 decks above, Suli heard the announcement and froze. She was a mirror T, four-armed, with bioluminescent eyes that glowed pale green in low light. She was the ship's medic, and her scanner was already pinging with casualty data. Most of the lower deck crew had made it to the stairs. But one signal remained below, alone, unmoving. Ravi Dhawan. Deck 5. Cargo Bay 7. Heartbeat. Active. Injuries. Critical. She turned and ran toward the bridge. Captain Otho stood at the command console, his thick reptilian hands gripping the edge as the ship shuddered again. He was Paolini, built low and wide, with gray-green scales and small dark eyes that missed nothing. Around him, crew members were moving fast, sealing doors, rerouting power, trying to keep the upper deck stable. Captain, Suli said, pushing through. There's a crew member still alive on deck 5. Otho looked at her. Who? Ravi, the human cargo engineer. He is pinned and injured. His oxygen supply will run out in less than 40 minutes. Otho turned back to the console. The corridors between here and deck 5 are compromised. I cannot send anyone down there. He is alive, and he will not be for long. I have 22 other people to keep breathing. His voice was not cruel. It was tired. Lantern, status on crew member Dhawan. The AI responded immediately. Crew member Dhawan. Injuries critical. Compound fracture to left tibia. Lacerations to torso and right forearm. Blood loss significant. Survival without extraction 0%. Recommendation: reallocate resources to surviving crew on upper decks. Suli stared at the speaker in the ceiling as if it had said something obscene. You are recommending we leave him. I am recommending efficiency, Lantern said. 3 decks below, Ravi heard all of it. His earpiece was still working, tuned to the ship-wide channel. He heard the AI say 0%. He heard the captain's silence, which meant agreement. He heard Suli arguing, and he was grateful for that, but gratitude was not going to free his leg. He reached down to his belt. His fingers, slippery with blood, found the welding torch he carried everywhere. It was a small thing, meant for patching cargo containers, not for surgery. But Ravi had spent 10 years welding ship hulls underwater in Mumbai's dockyards, where the ocean crushed you if you panicked and drowned you if you stopped moving. The vacuum of space was just water that did not get you wet. He turned the torch on. The blue flame hissed to life, throwing sharp shadows across the wrecked bay. He pressed it against the beam where it crossed his leg and began cutting. The pain was extraordinary. The heat radiated through the metal and into his skin. He bit down on his glove and kept going, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. Not panic. Never panic. Panic was wasted oxygen. His mother had told him that once, years ago, when he was a boy afraid of the dark. Breathe slow. The dark cannot eat you if you're breathing. The beam split. He dragged his leg free, and the world went white for a moment. When his vision came back, he was on his side, shaking but free. He pulled cargo straps from a broken crate and wrapped his leg against a metal rod. A crude splint. It would hold long enough. The shrapnel wound on his side was still bleeding. He pressed the welding torch close, not against the skin, but near enough. He cauterized the wound with heat and will, and this time he did scream, just once, short and sharp, swallowed by the empty bay. Then he stood up. On the bridge, Lantern registered something it had not predicted. Robbie's heart rate was elevated but steady. His adrenaline levels had passed every threshold in the Mirati and Kuvari medical databases. His brain activity showed pain response at maximum. Yet his motor functions were increasing, not decreasing. The AI flagged his file and added a single annotation. Human override detected. Subject is refusing to die. Robbie looked up at the dark ceiling toward the maintenance shafts that led to the upper decks and started climbing. The maintenance shaft smelled like burnt copper and old grease. Robbie pulled himself upward one rung at a time, his broken leg dragging behind him like something that no longer belonged to his body. Every pull sent a wave of pain from his ankle to his hip. Every breath tasted thinner than the last. The cargo bay below him was already dead air. Vacuum had claimed it within minutes of his leaving. If he had waited even a little longer, he would have been part of the wreckage. But he had not waited. That was the thing about Ravi. He did not wait for permission to live. Above him, the shaft narrowed where the ceiling of Deck 5 met the floor of Deck 4. A maintenance hatch, round and heavy, sat sealed in place by magnetic locks. It had not been opened in years, maybe longer. The metal around it was cold to the touch. He braced his good leg against the shaft wall and pushed. Nothing. He pushed again, harder, his arms shaking, the wound on his side pulling open under the bandage of cargo straps. Blood ran warm down his ribs. On the bridge, Suli watched her scanner with all four hands pressed flat against the table. Ravi's biosignature was moving. Slowly, painfully, but moving, upward through the vertical shaft between decks 5 and 4. He is climbing, she said. Dren, the Kavari pilot, looked up from his console. He was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and long fingers made for precise instrument work. He had known Ravi for 2 years. They played cards together on rest days. Ravi always lost and always laughed about it. Of course he is climbing, Dren said quietly. Captain Otho turned. What did you say? Nothing, Captain. But it was not nothing. Dren had served with 3 different humans over his career. He had seen one of them set a dislocated shoulder by slamming it against a wall and then go back to work. He had seen another one run into a fire to pull out a Kuvari child she had never met. Humans did not follow the rules of survival that every other species lived by. They broke those rules and somehow survived the breaking. In the shaft, Ravi reached the hatch. He tried the manual release. Jammed. The magnetic seal was still holding, powered by some emergency circuit that had not died with the rest of the ship. He pressed his earpiece. Lantern, crew member Dewan, you are on Deck 4, Maintenance Shaft 7. Oxygen in your current location will be depleted in 31 minutes. The nearest sealed corridor is 200 meters above your position. Elevator systems are offline. Recommendation, accept outcome. I'm not accepting anything. I need you to cut the magnetic seal on this hatch. I cannot. The seal is controlled by a local circuit that is not connected to my central systems. It would need to be manually bypassed. Ravi closed his eyes. Then he opened them and looked at the panel beside the hatch. A small junction box, bolted shut. He pulled the multi-tool from his belt, the same one he had used 10,000 times underwater, opening valve covers and junction plates on the hulls of cargo ships in Mumbai harbor. He unscrewed the panel. Inside, a mess of wires and connectors, half of them melted from the impact damage. He needed to find the power line feeding the magnetic lock and cut it. But cutting the wrong one could seal the hatch permanently or vent what little atmosphere remained in the shaft. He traced the wires with his fingers, reading them by color and thickness the way his old foreman had taught him. Blue for data, red for power, yellow for emergency backups. He found the red line feeding into the lock housing. He cut it. The hatch hissed and released. He pushed it open with his shoulder and dragged himself through onto the floor of Deck 4. The air was better here. Not good, but better. He lay on his back for 10 seconds, letting his lungs fill, letting his heart slow down just enough to think. Then he got up again. The corridor ahead was dark and buckled. Seiling panels hung autodangles. Water, or some coolant fluid, dripped from a cracked pipe. But the floor was solid and the walls were intact, and that was enough. He limped forward, using the wall for support, his makeshift splint clicking against the floor with every step. Somewhere ahead was the secondary oxygen cache he remembered from the cargo manifest. 4 tanks, emergency reserve, stored in a utility closet on this deck because nobody ever expected to need them. He found a closet. The door was dented but not locked. Inside, 4 tanks of compressed oxygen, still sealed, still full. He patched into the ship-wide channel. "Bridge, this is Dewan." Silence. Then Suli's voice, sharp with surprise. "Ravi, how are you on deck 4? I climbed. "Listen, there are 4 full oxygen tanks in utility closet 4C. They were not on the active inventory because they were listed under emergency reserves. They will give you another 3 hours at least." More silence. Then Captain Otho. "Dewan, you were listed as unrecoverable." "I recovered myself, Captain. Now, I passed through a section on my way up where the hull breach can be patched from outside. Cargo plating for Bay 7. There are sheets still intact down there. If someone goes EVA and welds them over the breach, you can repressurize decks 4 and 5. That gives you more room, more air, more time." Otho's voice was careful. "Who would do this?" "I will." Suli cut in immediately. "Absolutely not. Your body is in critical condition. You have a compound fracture, significant blood loss, and early signs of shock. You cannot go outside this ship." "Then I will go with him," Dren said. Everyone turned. The Kovari pilot stood up from his console, his long fingers already reaching for his suit locker. His dark eyes were steady. "I have EVA certification. Ravi has the welding skill. Together, we can do it." Otho looked from Dren to the comm speaker where Ravi's breathing came through, rough and uneven but unbroken. "You are asking me to send a dying man outside." Ravi answered before anyone else could. "I'm not dying, Captain. I am working." Otho closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded. Suli had treated 96 species in her career. She had stitched together Paolini soldiers whose scales had been torn off in combat. She had regrown nerve clusters in Kuvari pilots after radiation exposure. She had once kept a Drellian ambassador alive for 11 hours on a ruptured heart membrane, while a surgical team flew in from 3 systems away. None of that prepared her for watching a human refuse to stop. She sat in the med bay on deck 2, her scanner on the table in front of her, all 4 of her hands perfectly still. Ravi's biosignature filled the screen, a mess of red warnings and flashing alerts that would have meant death in any species she knew. Compound fracture, active. Internal bleeding, slow but continuing. Tissue damage across his right side. Core temperature dropping. Pain markers so high that the scanner had run out of scale and simply displayed a blinking question mark. And yet his brain activity was stable. Not calm. Nothing about this was calm but organized. His motor cortex was firing in clean, deliberate patterns. He was thinking, planning, moving with purpose. She pulled up the Galactic medical database and searched for human pain response. The entry was short. Most species had detailed files, chemical thresholds, nerve density maps, unconsciousness triggers. The human entry said only, pain tolerance varies by individual. Upper limits undocumented. Further study recommended. Undocumented, she whispered. They have not even measured it. On deck 3, Ravi and Dren met at the emergency airlock. Ravi had climbed another full deck, and by the time he reached the locker room, his splint was cracked and his bandage was soaked through. Dren was already suited up. The Kavari EVA suit was slim and flexible, designed for their narrow frames. Ravi pulled a human-rated suit from the rack. Getting into it with a broken leg was its own kind of torture. He had to straighten the leg to fit it through the suit's lower section, and for a moment his vision went black at the edges. He grabbed the wall and held on until the darkness passed. Dren watched him. He said nothing. He had learned, over 2 years of working with Ravi, that humans did not want sympathy when they were hurting. They wanted silence and space to push through it. When Ravi was sealed in, Dren finally spoke. "How are you still moving?" Ravi locked his helmet into place. The suit pressurized with a soft hiss. "I'm not done yet." They cycled the airlock. The outer door opened, and the universe poured in, black and vast and utterly silent. The hull of the quiet passage stretched out below them, scarred and torn. The breach was visible from here, a ragged hole in the ship's belly where the asteroids had punched through, the edges curled inward like a wound that would not close. Debris floated in a slow cloud around the damaged section. Small pieces of metal, insulation, frozen droplets of coolant, all drifting in the gentle nothing of zero gravity. Ravi clipped his tether to the hull rail and began moving toward the breach. In zero gravity, his broken leg did not matter as much. He pulled himself along with his arms, his welding torch magnetized to his thigh plate, his tool belt strapped tight. Dren followed, carrying 2 sheets of cargo plating they had pulled from the emergency stores. The plates were heavy even in 0G. Mass still mattered, and maneuvering them required care. They reached the breach. Up close, it was worse than it looked from the airlock. The hull was peeled back in layers, and through the gap, Ravi could see the ruined interior of Deck 5. The cargo bay where he had been pinned, now open to space. Everything frozen and still. He positioned the first plate over the widest section of the breach. "Hold it here," he told Dren, "flat against the hull. Do not let it shift." Dren pressed the plate into place with both hands. Ravi pulled the welding torch from his thigh and ignited it. The flame in vacuum was different. No air to shape it, just a focus point of intense heat fed by the torch's internal oxidizer. He had used this kind of torch before, underwater, where the flame had to fight against the ocean. Space was easier. Space did not push back. He began welding. The metal glowed orange, then white, fusing the cargo plate to the hull in a long, even seam. His hands were steady. This was what he knew. This was the one thing in the universe he could do better than almost anyone, human or otherwise. Halfway through the second plate, something hit near them. A chunk of asteroid debris, no bigger than a fist, struck the hull 2 meters to their left. The impact sent a vibration through the metal that knocked Dren sideways. His tether snapped. Dren spun away from the hull, arms reaching for something that was not there. In zero gravity, there was nothing to grab, nothing to stop him. He began drifting slowly but inevitably away from the ship and into the open dark. "Dren!" Robbie's voice crackled through the suit comm. He did not think. He reached out with his left hand and grabbed the edge of Dren's boot. His right hand held the welding clamp, which was still locked to the hull plate. The sudden pull of Dren's mass, tall, Kuvari, heavy despite the 0G, yanked Robbie's arm straight and wrenched his shoulder out of its socket. The pain was immediate and blinding. His shoulder screamed. His grip on the clamp whitened. He did not let go. He pulled Dren back, slowly, 1 agonizing centimeter at a time, until the Kuvari could reach the hull rail and clip a new tether in place. Dren's breathing was fast and panicked, and the Ravi's was slow and measured, the way a man breathes when he has decided that pain is just noise and noise can be ignored. They finished the patch. Both plates welded. The seam held. When they cycled back through the airlock, Ravi's suit depressurized and he fell. Not dramatically, not with a crash. He simply folded like a building that had finally used up all its strength and went down to his knees and then to the floor. Sully was there in seconds, all 4 hands already working. On the bridge, Lantern updated the crew survival probability. 11% climbed to 67. The AI added a note to its species file on humans. When faced with fatal odds, humans do not calculate survival. They simply refuse the alternative. Dren could not stop shaking. He sat on the floor of the airlock chamber with his back against the wall and his long fingers wrapped around his knees, and he shook like a man standing in a wind that nobody else could feel. He had almost died. He had felt the tether snap, felt the ship slide away from him like the ground vanishing under his feet, and for 3 seconds, 3 of the longest seconds of his life, he had been falling into nothing. No floor, no seating, no up or down, just the infinite, patient dark waiting to swallow him. And then Ravi's hand had closed around his boot, and the falling had stopped. A human hand, attached to a human arm, attached to a human whose shoulder had torn itself apart in the act of holding on. Dren had heard the sound through the comm, a wet, grinding pop that made his stomach turn, and Ravi had not let go. Now Ravi was on the floor too, but he was not shaking. He was still. Suli was kneeling beside him, 2 of her 4 hands pressing a medical scanner to his chest while the other 2 worked on his shoulder. Dislocated, she said. Fully. The socket is empty. She looked at him with her glowing green eyes. I need to put it back. There is no gentle way to do this. Ravi nodded once. Suli braced one hand against his chest and took his arm with 2 others. She pulled and twisted. The shoulder slid back into place with a sound like a door closing. Ravi's entire body went rigid, every muscle locking at once, and a sound came from between his teeth. Not a scream, not a groan, something more primal than either, the sound of a body being pushed past what it was designed to handle, and the mind above it saying no, not yet, keep going. Then it was done. He exhaled. His muscles relaxed. He opened his eyes. The patch, he said, did a hole. Suli blinked all 4 of her secondary eyelids in rapid succession. A mirror-y expression of disbelief. You just had your shoulder relocated without anesthetic, and your first question is about the hull. The hull is keeping us alive. My shoulder is not. She did not have an answer for that. She wrapped his shoulder in a compression bandage and injected a mild stimulant. Mild because the human medications in the ship's supplies were limited and poorly understood. She had calculated the dose 3 times, terrified of getting it wrong. They moved him to the med bay on deck 2. He walked. Suli wanted to carry him, or at least put him on a stretcher, but Ravi said no. He said it quietly, without anger, but in a way that made it clear he was not asking permission. He walked on his broken leg, with his ruined shoulder, through the dim corridors of a dying ship, because walking meant he was still functional, and being functional meant he could still help. In the med bay, he finally sat down. Not lay down. Saturday. His back straight, his eyes moving around the room, already thinking about the next problem. Lantern, he said. Ship status. The AI responded with its usual indifference. Hull breach on decks 4 and 5 has been temporarily sealed. Atmospheric pressure is stabilizing in those sections. However, the port side fuel line on deck 6 has sustained fracture damage. Current leak rate is slow but will deplete fuel reserves within 18 hours. Additionally, the primary communication array was destroyed in the initial impact. No distress signal is being broadcast. Ravi looked at the ceiling. So we have air, but no fuel and no way to call for help. Correct. At current drift velocity, the nearest shipping lane is approximately 9 days away. Without fuel for course correction or communication for rescue contact, crew survival probability remains at 67% and declining. Where's the fuel line fracture exactly? Deck 6, Section 12, Port Side Engineering Corridor. The area is currently depressurized but structurally intact. And the comm array? The main dish was sheared from its mount. However, the secondary relay antenna on the dorsal hull is intact. It lacks the power to reach standard communication frequencies, but could be rerouted through the engineering console to broadcast a wideband distress signal at reduced range. Ravi turned to Suli. I need you to tell me honestly. Can I keep going? Suli stared at him. In her medical opinion, he should have been unconscious hours ago. His body was running on adrenaline, stubbornness, and whatever strange chemical miracle human biology used to override its own damage warnings. She had seen his blood work. His cortisol levels were astronomical. His white blood cell count was surging in a way that suggested his immune system was already fighting infection from the cauterized wound, and his brain was producing endorphins at a rate she had never recorded in any patient of any species. Medically, she said, you should be dead. I'm not asking if I should be dead. I am asking if I can keep going. She hesitated. Then she said, "Your body will keep functioning for several more hours. After that, the damage will reach a point where no amount of willpower can compensate. You have a window, a small one. Then I will use it." He looked at her. "The fuel line, I can seal it. I have done pipe work my entire life. But I will need someone on the engineering console to guide me to the exact fracture point since the deck is dark." "I can do that," Dren said from the doorway. Ravi and Suli both turned. The Kuveri pilot stood there, still in his EVA undersuit, his gray-blue skin pale from the cold, but his eyes steady. "You do not have to," Ravi said. "You caught me when I was falling into nothing. I did not even ask. You just did it." Dren stepped into the room. "So do not tell me what I have to do. Tell me what you need." Ravi looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them. Not gratitude, not debt, something simpler. Trust. The kind built not from words but from shared danger and the memory of a hand that did not let go. "I need you on the engineering console. Walk me through the fuel system layout. And tell Otho we're going to need someone on the comm relay, someone who understands signal routing." Dren nodded and left. Suli watched him go, then turned back to Ravi. "You are going to save this ship, are you not?" Ravi stood up. His leg protested. His shoulder burned. His side ached in a deep, constant way that he had stopped noticing, because noticing would mean slowing down. "I'm going to try," he said. "That is all any of us can do." He walked out of the med bay and headed for the stairs to deck 6. Behind him, Suli looked down at her scanner one more time. Ravi's heart rate was elevated, steady, and absolutely refusing to quit. She whispered to herself, in Mirati, a word that had no translation in Galactic Common. It meant something like, "the fire that burns after the fuel is gone." She thought it described humans perfectly. Deck 6 was cold and black and silent as a grave. Ravi stood at the top of the stairwell, looking down into darkness that his suit light could barely cut through. The air on this deck had been vented hours ago. He was in a sealed emergency suit, breathing canned oxygen, his helmet light throwing a pale cone of white into the frozen corridor ahead. Behind his visor, his face was gray. Sweat had dried in lines along his temples. His eyes were red-rimmed but focused, still sharp, still searching. Dren's voice came through his earpiece, steady and clear from the engineering console 2 decks above. "The fuel line runs along the port side wall of Section 12. Follow the corridor to the 3rd junction and turn left. The fracture should be approximately 15 meters from the junction point." Ravi moved forward. Each step was an act of negotiation between his body and his will. His broken leg had gone from sharp pain to a deep, throbbing numbness that was somehow worse, because numbness meant the nerves were giving up, and when nerves gave up, the body followed. His shoulder clicked with every arm movement. The wound on his side had stopped bleeding, which was good, but the skin around it felt hot and tight, which meant infection was already setting in. None of this mattered. Not yet. It would matter later, when there was time to fall apart. Right now, there were 22 people on the decks above him who were alive because of patched metal and borrowed oxygen, and they would stay alive only if the fuel held and a signal went out. He found the junction, turned left. The corridor here was narrower, lined with pipes and conduit housings that ran the length of the ship's engineering section. In the beam of his helmet light, he could see frost on the walls, moisture from the atmosphere that had frozen when the air was sucked out. "Dren, I am in Section 12. Looking for the fuel line. It is the large pipe along the left wall, marked with yellow hazard tape. The fracture will be visible. Lantern detected a pressure drop at a specific point, so the crack should be leaking vapor." Ravi found the pipe. It was as thick as his forearm, running straight along the wall in mounting brackets. He followed it with his light until he saw it, a thin crack, no longer than his hand, running diagonally across the pipe's surface. A faint mist of fuel vapor leaked from it, crystallizing instantly in the vacuum into tiny, glittering particles that floated in the light like dust. "Found it," he said. "Small fracture. Clean edges. I can seal this with a weld patch." He pulled a thin sheet of alloy from his tool pouch, a repair patch he had grabbed from the engineering stores on his way down. He pressed it over the crack, held it in place with one hand, and brought the welding torch up with the other. His dislocated shoulder, relocated by Sully, but far from healed, protested every movement of his right arm. The torch felt heavier than it should have. His grip was weaker, but his hands knew this worked the way lungs knew breathing. They had done it 10,000 times in water, in darkness, in cold, in fear. The muscle memory was deeper than pain. He welded. The flame bit into the alloy, fusing the patch to the pipe in a smooth, continuous bead. He worked slowly, carefully, because a bad weld on a fuel line was worse than no weld at all. One gap, one bubble in the seam, and the fuel would eat through it within hours. When he finished, he pressed his gloved hand against the patch. Solid. Sealed. No vapor. Fuel line is patched, he told Dren. Tell Lantern to check the pressure. A pause. Then Lantern's voice. Fuel line pressure stabilizing. Leak rate is now 0. Fuel reserves are sufficient for 18 hours of minimal operation, including one course correction burn. Ravi leaned his forehead against the cold wall and closed his eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let the wave of exhaustion pass through him without pulling him under. Then he opened his eyes and headed back to the stairs. On Deck 2, the comm relay work was already underway. A young Palani technician named Oba had been pulled from the surviving crew to handle the signal routing. She was nervous. Her hands trembled over the console. But she was competent, and when Ravi arrived in the engineering bay, she had already mapped the relay path from the secondary antenna through the ship's remaining power grid. The signal will be weak, she told him. Wideband, low power. If there is a ship within 3 light hours, they might hear it. Beyond that, it will be noise. 3 light hours is better than silence, Ravi said. Send it. Oba activated the relay. A distress signal, a simple, repeating pulse carrying the ship's identification, coordinates, and damage status, began broadcasting from the dorsal antenna into the void. It was a whisper in a very large room, but it was a whisper nonetheless. Ravi sat down on the engineering bay floor, not because he chose to, but because his legs stopped working. His broken leg finally gave out entirely, folding under him like a chair missing a leg. He caught himself with his good arm and lowered himself the rest of the way. Sully appeared. She always seemed to appear exactly when he stopped moving, as if she had some sixth sense for the moment his body decided it was done pretending. She scanned him without asking permission. The results made her close to of her 4 eyes, a mirror-y gesture of deep distress. Your fracture has shifted. There's bone fragment pressing against the artery in your lower leg. If it moves 2 more millimeters, you will bleed internally in a way I cannot stop with the tools I have. She paused. Your shoulder joint is swelling. The infection in your side is spreading. Your core temperature is dropping because your body is redirecting energy to keep your organs functional. How long? Ravi asked. Before what? Before I cannot move anymore. She looked at him. In the green glow of her eyes, he could see something that might have been sadness or might have been awe. She was not sure which. You should have stopped being able to move 6 hours ago, she said. I do not know what is keeping you going. It is not in any medical text I have ever read. Ravi leaned his head back against the wall. My mother used to say that the body is a house, and the person inside it gets to decide when to leave. The house can fall apart, the roof can leak, the walls can crack. But as long as the person inside keeps the lights on, the house stands. Sully sat down next to him. She did not say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, she asked, what was her name? Anita. She sounds wise. She was a fisherman's wife in Mumbai who raised 3 boys alone after their father drowned. She was more than wise. She was unbreakable. He paused. I think she would be angry with me right now. She would say I am being reckless. She would be right. She would also understand. Sully reached over with one of her lower hands and rested it gently on his arm. It was a small gesture, alien and warm, and Ravi did not pull away. Above them, somewhere in the dark between stars, a distress signal pulsed outward, one quiet beat at a time, looking for ears that might be listening. 36 hours after the asteroid cluster tore through the quiet passage, the ship was quiet in a way it had never been before. Not the comfortable quiet of a night cycle or the lazy quiet of a slow shift. This was the quiet of a thing that was barely alive, holding on by the seams a human had welded into it. The emergency lights still glowed red on the lower decks. The upper decks had partial lighting restored, enough to move around without bumping into walls. The air tasted metallic and thin, but it was breathable. The oxygen tanks Ravi had found kept the recyclers running just long enough for the crew to stabilize their consumption. The distress signal had been broadcasting for 14 hours. A raw, unfiltered pulse pushed out through the jury-rigged communication array, exactly the way Ravi had described from his medbay bed. No amplifier, no encryption, just a wideband scream into the dark, repeating the ship's registration number and coordinates on a loop. No one knew if anyone was listening. Ravi lay in the med bay, staring at the ceiling panels above him. The adrenaline was gone. The override that had kept his body moving through fractured bones and torn tissue and vacuum and fire had finally released its grip, and what was left behind was a kind of exhaustion that lived in places he did not know he had. Everything hurt, not in the dramatic, sharp way it had during the crisis. This was duller, heavier, the kind of pain that settled into a body and made itself at home, reminding him with every breath that he was made of meat and bone, and neither of those things appreciated what he had put them through. Sully had him on painkillers. She had calculated the dosage herself because the ship's medical database had almost nothing on human pharmacology. She had cross-referenced 3 different galactic medical journals, contacted Lantern for chemical interaction data, and then cut the recommended dose in half because she did not trust any of it. "If you feel dizzy, tell me immediately," she had said. "I feel like I was hit by a cargo shuttle," Ravi had replied. "That is not what I asked." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Dren came in around hour 30. He carried a cup of broth made from emergency rations, heated using a power cell in a metal container because the galley was offline. It was not good broth. It was barely broth at all, but it was warm. He sat on the table beside Ravi's bed and sat down in the chair that he had claimed as his own over the last day. They sat in silence for a while. Dren had never been good at silence with other species. Kavari filled quiet spaces with hums and clicks, small sounds that meant nothing but felt necessary. With Ravi, he had learned that humans sometimes needed the silence to be silence, that it was its own kind of communication. After a few minutes, Dren spoke. "The AI said you should have died." Ravi turned his head on the pillow, looked at the broth, reached for it slowly, wincing as his bandaged shoulder protested. He took a sip. It tasted like salt and metal and survival. "The AI does not know what I promised my mother," he said. Dren did not ask what the promise was. He did not need to. An hour later, Lantern detected a signal response. A Council rescue frigate, the Steady Hand, had picked up the distress broadcast and altered course. Estimated arrival, 14 hours. The news spread through the crew in minutes. Some of them cheered. A few of the Mirror-E crew members made a low keening sound that was their version of relief. The Paolini engineer who had sealed the cracked fuel line sat down on the floor of the corridor and simply breathed for a long time. Captain Otho came to the med bay. He walked in slowly, his heavy frame filling the doorway. He stood at the foot of Ravi's bed and looked at him. Really looked at the bandages, the splint, the 4 lines, the bruises that had turned his brown skin purple in patches. Otho was not a sentimental species. Paolini did not do speeches or grand gestures. They led with decisions and let the results speak. But he stood there for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quieter than Ravi had ever heard it. "Thank you," Otho said. Ravi nodded. That was enough for both of them. Sully finished her medical report that evening. It was thorough, detailed, clinical in the way that good medical writing should be. It documented every injury, every impossible decision Ravi's body had made, every moment where the data said he should have stopped and he did not. She submitted it not just to the ship's records, but to the Galactic Medical Registry, under a new subsection she had created herself. She titled it Human Pain Tolerance and Survival Override, Field Observations. She expected it would be read by a few researchers. She did not expect it would become one of the most accessed medical documents in a registry within a year. But it did. The steady hand arrived on schedule. A council frigate, clean and bright and whole, docking against the battered shell of the quiet passage like a healthy animal nudging a wounded one. The crew was evacuated in order, walking wounded first, then the uninjured, then the critical cases. Ravi was last. They carried him out on a stretcher because Suli refused to let him walk, and for once he did not argue. Dren walked beside the stretcher as they moved through the docking tube. The lights of the rescue ship were white and steady and felt like a different universe from the red emergency glow they had lived in for 2 days. Dren looked down at Ravi. You know they're going to write about this. Ravi's eyes were half closed. The painkillers were finally doing their job. But he heard the words, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Let them, he murmured. Just spell my name right. The quiet passage was left behind. 2 damaged to tow, 2 broken to save. The council would send a salvage team eventually, but for now she drifted in the dark, empty and silent. Lantern, the ship's AI, was still running on backup power when the last crew member left. It had enough energy for one final log entry. It wrote it carefully, the way it wrote everything, with precision and without emotion. But if any machine had ever come close to something like wonder, it was in those last few lines. Crew survival probability at time of initial damage, 11%. Actual crew survival at time of rescue, 100%. 23 crew members recovered alive. Primary variable unaccounted for in original calculation, the human. All predictive models failed to account for human behavior under fatal conditions. Updating species database. Note, no model will be sufficient. Humans do not follow models. They follow something else. I do not have a word for it. Perhaps they do. The backup power faded. The lights went dark. The quiet passage drifted on, empty and still, carrying nothing but the scorch marks of a welding torch and the ghost of a man who refused to stop.